let's try this again. Let's say we had another source from an author whose last name was Boone, and we found this quote on page 71 of their text. Women eat more raw vegetables than men do. I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah, this is the quote we're working with. And let's say that in our paper we said then, women consume more raw vegetables than men. Is this a close paraphrase? You better believe it. Right, this is not acceptable. It's a close paraphrase. Notice the language is still very similar to the language of the original. Okay, so what if we just flopped it around? Right, say, okay, well, if women eat more raw vegetables than men do, I'm just going to flip it so it says men eat less raw vegetables than women do. Again, no, this would not be considered acceptable, because it's very clear that the wording is the same. It's just been flip-flopped, right? So that instead of women eat more, men eat less. It's the same thing. What we need to do is put it into our own words, like this writer did. The dietary habits of men and women are quite different, especially when we consider the vast amounts of vegetables that women eat as compared with the limited amount of vegetables eaten by men. The idea of the original source is still there, but it has been put into completely different words. Okay, and by doing this, you will not be guilty of plagiarism. Now let's look at some definite don'ts, things we don't want to make sure that you don't do within your paper. You definitely don't want to copy and paste complete papers from electronic sources. That makes my job easy because I can just go out, type in a sentence, find it, and give you a 0. Copying and pasting passages from electronic sources or other sources without placing the passages in quotes and properly citing the source. Okay? Just because you put quotation marks around it doesn't mean that it isn't plagiarism. You still have to make sure that you cite it. You have to put in an in-text citation after the sentence or paragraph that you use, and put it on the works cited page. Having others write complete papers or portions of it for you. I know on an online course it can sometimes be tempting, but you don't want to do that because it's cheating, and we will find out, and then your life will not be a happy one. Summarizing ideas without citing their source. If the idea isn't yours, you have to cite it, even if it's just a summary that you have done. Pulling out quotes from sources without putting quotation marks around the passages. If it's not your words, use quotation marks. Close paraphrasing, which we just talked about. Not putting the information in your own words. Even if it's cited, it would be considered plagiarism because the structure of the original source is still very clearly apparent within your new sentence. Quoting statistics without naming the source, unless you gather the data yourself. Just because a source is a graph or a chart or something of that nature does not mean it's not a source. You still have to cite it. Using words and passages you don't understand and can't explain. If suddenly within your paper you're talking about pneumoconiosis disease and things like that, and it's clear that you don't know what it is, it doesn't belong within your paper. You want to make sure that you're using language which is appropriate for yourself. It'll be rather clear to a teacher if your language suddenly shifts from being, moderate freshman comp language to using words which you probably don't know. Okay, so don't do that. Self-plagiarizing, using one paper for more than one class without the permission of your professors. This is also considered plagiarism because you're using your work for more than one class. Like, let's say you wrote a paper for your English class, psychoanalyzing a character, and you decide you want to use it in your psychology course. Well, that psychology teacher would be right in giving you a 0 because you haven't really created a new work for that class. You're just recycling an old piece of work. Okay? So don't do that. Making up sources and making up bibliographic or citation information. You don't want to do that either because college teachers do check your sources. We do check to make sure that the quotes you use did actually come from those sources. And if then you make up a source that doesn't exist, well, then the burden is going to be on you to say, okay, well, where did you get this from? I can't find it. And if you can't produce it, then we're going to assume that you made it up. So don't make up any sources or do citation faking. That'll just get you into trouble. Using photographs, video, or audio without permission or acknowledgement. This is considered plagiarism out in the publishing world. However, in academic settings, you are protected from this as long as you cite it, because you are not using it for profit. You're using it for academic purposes. Don't worry about this last one on this list so much. As long as you cite it, it's okay. But know that if you were to publish the work that you have created, you would have to get permission from the person who created that work. Other things which are considered plagiarism, which don't come up quite as much, translating from one language to another without properly citing the original source. In other words, if there's an article in Spanish and you use the translate function, or you just happen to be good at translating, and you put it in English, you got to make sure you cite that as well. Don't use somebody else's work like that. Copying computer programs or other technical information without acknowledgement. In other words, if something's on your Encyclopedia Britannica CD, that is still a source, and you have to cite it. Failing to acknowledge sources of oral presentations, slides, or web projects. For example, let's say that you wanted to use this PowerPoint video in your paper. You won't have to do anything like that here, but let's say that this was a source that you wanted to use. You would have to cite the video presentation. Okay? So we want to make sure that if you have any sources like that, you still cite them. Also failing to acknowledge sources of elements of nonverbal work, such as painting, dance, musical, mathematical proofs, etc., etc. Basically, if you use a source, if you get some information from a source, no matter what it is, that did not come from you, you have to give credit to that original source. Okay? And since we are giving credit, we're talking about giving credit, this particular list was adapted from one by the University of Maine at Farmington.